Welcome to the Dog Trainers Podcast, a podcast created by dog trainers, for dog trainers, or anyone who's ever fallen in love with man's best friend.
Episode 17, the current puppy boom.
All right, so anything else you want to talk about before we move on?
No, let's dive into some puppy raising tips and training techniques.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right, you want to start? You want me to start? What you want?
I wanted you to start because I know that we were, as we were breaking this stuff down, you definitely have a really great way to to separate and explain the importance of routine building, and then I'll get into some other stuff after the fact.
Cool, man. All right, so we have a couple different checkpoints that we want to develop with puppies, and we're talking about the first 1 to 2 weeks of owning the puppy. So this is how I like to teach people. You have 1 week to develop 5 things. The first thing, make sure you start developing a potty training or a eating schedule. All right. We want to make sure our dogs eat meals at specific times so that we can do a bunch of different types of training, right? We can teach the dogs, oh, you eat your meals in your crate, or you eat your meals in your X pen, or you eat your meals at this time. So we can start developing an expectation, which helps develop a little bit of motivation for learning, right? So making sure our dogs are on strict meal schedules. So usually puppies under 4 months, they tend to get 3 meals a day. Now the trick is we need to make sure that these meals are proportionate to the dog's size, right? So many times, and again, this is a breeding technique versus a training technique, right? The very, very famous dean of dog training, Ian Dunbar, he is notorious for saying this. Make sure you get your veterinary information from your vet. Make sure you get your breeding information from your breeder, and make sure you get your dog training information from a dog trainer. Unfortunately, a lot of people are getting training information from their breeder. They're getting veterinary information from their dog trainer, and they're getting dog training advice from the store clerk at the pet store, right? So make sure that you guys are getting information from the people who are in the proper lanes, because we're specialists in our fields for one particular reason, because we're going to help you for the specific phase of life that you're in. I never give advice on health. I say, talk to your vet because I know better, right? Don't get me wrong. I know a lot about the veterinary field because I've been doing this long enough. However, if there's something that I don't know that's pretty detrimental, I'm not going to make executive decisions on it. I'm just going to give the advice that I know and say consult with a vet, right? However, vets don't really do that, and breeders don't really do that. So a breeder's technique is feed the puppies as much as they want to eat, right? Because from a breeder standpoint, they want to make sure the puppies are healthy, fat, and full, and that they're growing at a good rate. So that makes complete sense, right? As a breeder, right? Mm-hmm. From a dog training standpoint, if your dog is eating a bunch of food all day long, guess what that means? Any guesses? Free feeding. And this also means a lot of pooping all day long, right? So if your dog has a lot of poop accidents inside the house or in his crate or whatever it is, the very, very first thing we want to do is make sure that our dogs are eating the proper portions 3 times a day. Right? Do not overfeed your puppy, because if you overfeed your puppy, you can lower the food appetite. You can mess up the timing of potty training to make sure the dog's going in the right areas. So just keep that in mind. All right. Number 2 thing that we want to get done within the first week, we want to make sure that we're designating a potty area for the dog. Okay. Some of the common mistakes that I see is people will have potty pads all over their house. Literally, it's like the dog poops somewhere in the kitchen, they put a potty pad there. The dog poops in the living room, they put a potty pad there. The dog poops by the front door, they put a potty pad there. So I could literally skip from potty pad to potty pad in different homes that I visit, which is the wrong way to develop potty areas, right? The big key for potty training is you want it to be the same area, the same surface, in the same and develop enough scent on that area so that the dog starts developing the habit and desire to go there. So I would pick 1, maybe 2 areas where it's acceptable for your dog to go potty and stick to it, right? And make sure anytime your dog has to go potty, we take them there. So step number 2 is making sure our dog's potty trained. Number 3, make sure our dogs sleep all the way through the night. right? So I can't explain to you how many calls I get that go, my dog constantly wakes me up at 2 a.m. My dog constantly wakes me up at 4 a.m. And that's usually simply because the first two or the meal times are off. So we can adjust meals, adjust water intake a little bit towards the end of the day so that our dogs learn to sleep the full 8 hours in the evening. Okay. Number 4, we want to make sure our dogs are okay being alone. Right. So if we make sure that our dogs are okay being alone throughout the day, let's say I'm working, my dog can be in his area for, an hour, and then we take them out to go potty and play with them. That's very, very good, because if our dogs are good with being alone occasionally, then that opens up a lot of doors for confidence building, for teaching them to chew on bones and play with other toys, and then most importantly, develop their confidence and independence. Right. And then the very last thing is this. When our dogs have freedom in the house, we need to be very, very clear with our dogs. Idle time inside the house tends to create bad behaviors, right? So when our dogs are free inside the house, we want to make sure that we're teaching our dogs something. We want to make sure we're teaching them to play. We're teaching them obedience. We're teaching them manners. We're teaching them bite inhibition, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But we're teaching them a number of different things that are going to be helpful for when they are adults, right? The biggest mistake people make, again, we said too much freedom means the dog is spending too much unattended freedom inside the house, doing a lot of bad things, where then later we want to punish them or reprimand them for, right? So always make sure, as a dog owner, the key to successful training, when you do give the dog freedom, make sure you give him supervision and make sure you give him engagement and learning, right? If you don't do that, then we're going to end up yelling at our dogs more than praising our dogs. Okay. So anyways, those are my 5 top tips of what we should develop in the first week. And I'm telling you guys, it's the first week. If you guys have not developed this in the first week of owning a puppy, call a dog trainer ASAP, because you need to get these things under control, because they do get worse over time. Okay.
100%.
Yeah. So a couple of the things that overlap with these top 5 tips that I have for puppies. We talked about den training. Right. So den training could be crate training, could be X-pen training, whatever it is we want to teach our dogs to be okay being isolated from us. Right. Which takes a little bit of time. Right. Potty training, again, making sure that our dog's potty training is under control. Bite inhibition, which we mentioned earlier. Bite inhibition, for those of you guys who don't know, it is our dog's awareness of how strong their mouths are. Ultimately, right? So So a lot of people call me, like I got a call today, right? It said, "Hey, I have a 10-week-old puppy who's really aggressive," and I go, "Oh, tell me a little bit about it." And he goes, "Yeah, he's just always biting me, and he's always biting my family, and he's just really aggressive." And I said, "Now, what do you mean by aggressive? Like, is he growling? Is he like snarling at you?" He goes, "No, he just comes up and bites my shoelaces, bites my pant legs, bites my hands." And I have to tell him, I said, "Oh, that's just having a puppy. That's just what puppies do, you know?" And so bite inhibition is ultimately how humans teach dogs, and dogs teach dogs also, but we're teaching puppies the strength of their own jaw. And if we don't teach that at a really, really young age, then we run the risk of, when the dog is older, they use their mouth disproportionately, which means, in situations they just wanted to nibble, they actually draw blood on accident, right? Or in situations where they just wanted to grab your shirt, they end up puncturing holes through your shirt. Right. So bite inhibition is super duper important. I would say a majority of bites that happen in adolescent dogs are usually from dogs who have horrible bite inhibition. Right. Now, next thing we'll talk about is, something that supplements bite inhibition is chew training. Right. So we need to make sure we teach dogs what they should be chewing on, versus our hands, versus our shoes, versus our couch, our pillow, etc. So this would be things like dental chews. This would be things like crinkle toys. This would be things like ropes that they can sink their teeth into. One of the very old school techniques that people would do, they would get a little hand towel, they'd soak it in some chicken broth, and they freeze it. And this would be great for dogs to chew on, had good flavor, but most importantly, they'd be able to sink their teeth into it. But the most important thing about chew training is teaching our dogs to obsess over items that we want them to love when they're older, right? So this way they have an outlet for stress. They have an outlet for stimulation, brain stimulation. They have an outlet for, burning off some mental energy, right? So that's chew training. And then most important, and then our last one is going to be exercise. Okay. So many times I get people who ask, what's the right amount of exercise I should do with my dog? From my experience, what I've noticed raising a bunch of puppies don't have a lot of stamina, right? Which means they get tired pretty quickly. I would say the average puppy has about 30 minutes to 40 minutes of active learning and engagement, right? Doesn't mean that they fall asleep right at 40 minutes. It just means you'll start seeing that our dogs don't need 1 to 2 hours of exercise at any given time. They just need 30 to 40 minutes of active engagement, right? And so some mistakes that I see is people want to take their puppies for walks. Walks are exercise for fully vaccinated and confident dogs, right? So save that for a little bit later in the dog's puppyhood. Okay. But the best types of exercise would be actually like playing, toys, throwing the ball, squeakies. Training is a good form of exercise as well. It's a mental and a physical situation. But the idea is we want to master exercise with our dogs. Now, exercise is going to differ a little bit from dog to dog. Some dogs are more prone to learning certain skills over others, but the idea is we want exercise to be part of our routine, right? So there's one thing I'll finish this section off with, which is what I call a puppy cycle. Okay. A puppy cycle is your dog waking up, going potty. Your dog is fed something, be it a meal or be it training, right? After the dog eats something, then the dog's probably going to have to go potty again. After the dog goes potty that second time, then we give the dog freedom. Then we give the dog playtime. We give the dog the opportunity to exercise. Now, after those 30 to 40 minutes of exercise, our puppies will take a nap. Naturally, if we calm them down or if we confine them, our dogs will take a nap, right? So this is one puppy cycle. Now, always what I want to motivate my people to do is to figure out to repeat this puppy cycle as many times as necessary for their puppies throughout the day, right? So I would say on average, there's 5 to 6 puppy cycles per day that happen before we go back to bed. Right. So anyways, so that's my idea of routine building: den training, potty training, bite inhibition, chew training, exercises, and all of this fall into a puppy cycle. If we do multiple puppy cycles per day, now we have our daily routine for our dogs.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of thing plays perfectly into relationship to learning stuff, which I think is, I'm going to kind of explain what it is first and then get into some points about it, because it's one of those things that we talked about this to an extent in our socialization deeper look episode. And it was a lot of people with puppies, if they have certain expectations to them, to one side or the other, they're either too lenient or expect too much out of them straight off the bat. In either one of those instances, they don't understand why it's important to not necessarily stick super firm to one particular like point
Mm-hmm.
of what they want versus just keeping the dog at such a young age, their overall attitude and ideas toward training and being attentive and listening to you as an owner, high. And here's a clearer example of what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say, I like to tell people this: when you're working with the puppy for the first few actual food lessons of obedience, straight up obedience. Now the routine building stuff is already underway. So we're talking direct, like here's some food, sit good, sit good. Now you'll notice in the first lesson or two, the puppy loves treats or even their kibble. A lot of puppies just eat straight their kibble.
Mm-hmm.
They're excited for it, which is great. Tail wagging, having fun. But like 3, 4, 5 lessons in, they're even more excited because
Yeah.
now they've had a chance to develop the love for it. And they're like, oh, this game is fun. So you're telling me I just do this easy thing and I get food. And on top of that, you're like happy about it. And it's like, good boy.
Mm-hmm.
And, all this stuff starts to steamroll. So I always try to make it very clear to owners: when you're doing food work with your puppy, yes, of course, you're teaching the commands themselves and you're working on just markers and timing and all the core foundational stuff of training, 100%. But you're also building your dog's character. You're teaching a dog to
Right.
want to focus, to want to pay attention to you, to want to work hard for you. Now, uh, where people get stuck, this is what I started with, was let's say you do 3, 4 food lessons, dog's looking good with like food sits and getting there with food downs, but
Mhm.
they keep breaking after like 2 seconds, and you're like, oh, if this puppy would wait for freaking 5 seconds, I would just release you and reward you.
Mhm.
People can get stuck, which is not the right thing to do, especially when you're dealing with a dog so young. They'll get stuck on that one goal, like, no, I want the 5 second down. So they'll do something like lure the dog into a food sit, food down. All that looks great. One, two, and on second number three, the dog gets up. So they'll jam a leash on and like start leash pressure the dog to the ground
Mhm.
just to get
Mhm.
to the 5 second mark. And it, you know,
Right.
I guess technically you got it, but you really shot yourself in the foot because now the puppy's going to be like, whoa, that wasn't fun. And
Leash is no bueno.
right, exactly. And so you really have to pay attention to make sure that when you're building a dog at such a young age, their relationship to learning, you're starting from scratch. So making sure that you understand how to develop motivation, when to turn it up if the dog's having fun, to keep it challenging so the dog stays engaged, but not crushing the dog, because that's a
Right.
very easy thing to do when you have a puppy. Um,
Right.
building focus is kind of along that same thing. A lot of it is just that's a lot of when like very mild distraction stuff comes into play. Can my dog stay attentive to me? And again, food work, like obedience, simple stuff is a really great way to do that. Start building your front to heels, your sits and downs, and some very basic like place and stuff with food. The crate
Mhm.
command is a huge one with food, especially if you're going to be feeding your dog in the crate, which lends itself to routine building. Um,
Mhm.
I think an interesting one too is again, this ties a lot into socializing, but you have to be a little bit fluid with it. Don't Dog training isn't always linear. Like if I
Mhm.
go out after we're done here and do another lesson with one of my training dogs, and they do a little worse this time than they did like a couple hours ago, you can't kind of take that to heart.
No.
Dogs, there are many reasons why they fluctuate throughout the day, and this one's young too, by the way. He's 5 months old. He's not a super young dog, but he's a puppy, and
Mhm.
he has his little puppy cycles too. Maybe less so as he gets that little bit older, but
Mhm.
you'll notice he's kind of more attentive in the afternoon. He's a little more distracted in the evening. It's other stuff going on too. Maybe the other dogs are a little more excitable, like right around sundown. And there's so many factors to consider. But with all that, you just have to meet the dog where they are in that moment, and just know that with puppies, that's turned up to 11. So if he's so if he's distracted at the moment or just can't do it for whatever reason, like definitely challenge him enough that it's challenging but doable. I want the dog to win a lot because I want them to understand training is something that is fun. I do really
Yes.
good at it. That goes into confidence building too. It's something that I want to do more. In fact, I like this guy. In fact, I like listening to this guy. And that sets you up
Or
for,
girl. Or
or
girl.
girl, sure. So it sets you up in such a great way in the future of like that's what we mean when we see a lot of people with older dogs. You're like, you live with the dog, they kind of know you and love you and stuff like that, but they don't quite look to you for advice, direction, coaching, guidance. And
Right.
teaching a dog to learn from you, teaching the dog to have that relationship with you of like, hey, listen, I love you, I'm dad or mom, but I'm also the person you come to when you're stuck.
Right.
That changes so much when it comes to puppy raising, and that's one thing that I really want to make sure that people listen to this and take that from this.
Right. No, I can't agree more. I think relationship to learning stuff is literally the foundation of your relationship with your dog.
Right.
Right. So many people, they waste the first 4 to 6 months of their puppy's childhood and they don't develop that rapport. Right. It's like, imagine not playing with your, well, here's the thing. There's a lot of people who play with their puppies, but getting the dog to want to work and please you is ultimately the shift in the relationship, right? Do you want to be the dog's playmate or do you want to be the dog's instructor that he likes to please, right? It really depends on what your expectation of your overall relationship is, right? So yeah, that's interesting, man. Interesting.